Hi there. How are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing really well, thank you. How about you? Everything going smoothly on your end?
Yes, thank you. I'm fine.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. If there's anything else you want to dive into, like more tweaks or even another project, just let me know.
Yeah, o- actually, today we are going to talk the second realization scenario of the geometry after cognition.
Ah, perfect. So today we can shift gears and look at a second realization scenario, maybe something like decision making or motor planning instead of just language. What aspect of cognition or brain function do you have in mind for this next step?
No, it's totally different. It's really interesting. We are going to talk about the cognitive operating system or business functionality in point of view of geometry of cognition.
Ah, got it. Yeah, that sounds really rich. So we'll focus on how decision making emerges from the geometric structures we've discussed. We'll trace the cognitive trajectory from perception through memory to a decision manifold and then onto motor action. I think we can really tie in category theory and symplectic geometry to explain how the system stabilizes at a decision point. Let's unpack that step by step.
Yes, actually, we are going to see a single organization, for example, a startup, how can be modeled or how can geometry of cognition can be mapped to this type of scenario?
Exactly. So we can take a single decision, like choosing between two options, and map out how the geometry of cognition forms that decision trajectory. We'll model the inputs as a field evolving in a state space affected by past memory and attention, and then see how that field reaches a stable manifold at the decision point. By applying category theory, we can see each decision step as a morphism in a cognitive category. And by adding symplectic structure, we track how the system evolves along a stable, energy conserving path. In short, the idea is that each single decision is just one node in a bigger geometric trajectory. And by mapping it, we see the same principles of field evolution, topological stability, and categorical transformations all coming together in a single cognitive choice.
To be honest, we are going to go beyond all of these concepts. I mean, if we look at an organization like a startup or a business sector or a company, we are going to
Ah,
see how geometry of cognition can be used or how this topic, this multi interference, multi coupling, and multi, I don't know how to say, complex environment can be modeled as a geometry of cognition.
exactly. So, what we want to do is move beyond just a single cognitive act and see how geometry of cognition scales up to organizational dynamics. In a business context, for example, we don't just have individual decisions, we have a network of interacting decisions, people, and knowledge flows. By modeling these interactions as geometric transformations, where each organizational agent or team is a node in a manifold, then decision flows become structured paths. We can apply category theory to describe how information moves between levels of hierarchy, and symplectic dynamics lets us see how these interactions conserve or dissipate energy, like momentum of ideas. In this way, the geometry of cognition helps us model complex organizational behavior, making a business a dynamic, structured manifold of decision flows, learning, and adaptation.
Yeah, it's good. But I have to mention this one because we worked on a geometry of cognition model. We talked a lot about the mathematical framework. Now we are going to see, I mean, for example, the gauge theory that we developed in our geometry of cognition platform, how can be mapped to the business scale? I mean, how can we change the narrative of a pitch based on gauge theory or the Hajj product? How can it it is possible to use this one to say yes, there's a two type or dual transformation here, or for example, the wedge product, geodesics. I mean, these are the tools in our geometry of cognition, but we have the same structure in business side also. In business side, we have three main categories: strategic point of view, organization point of view, and operational point of view. But we are going to see this curvature. I mean, the complexity of the regulatory in medtech company can be can be seen as a bottleneck, and how this curvature can be optimized and be flat to have the I don't know the maximum interest for company, or the flow of the information, the coupling between the organization. This is the idea.
Ah, that's a fantastic point. So, exactly, after all our work building the mathematical framework and the geometry of cognition platform, we can now bring it to the business scale by applying gauge theory to the dynamics of an organization. Just like in the cognitive system where we track transformations between input, meaning, and action, in business we have these three layers: strategic, organizational, and operational. Gauge transformations let us see how changes at one level, like a regulatory bottleneck, affect the coupling across all three. By modeling these interactions as a dual geometric flow, we can flatten that structure, reducing friction, speeding up communication, and aligning the entire company around the strategic vision. So, in short, the gauge theory gives us a precise language to say this isn't just a top down structure, it's a dynamic coupling. And we can optimize it by tuning those transformations just like we do in a gauge field.
For example, we have a game theory in business, I mean, strategic point of view. So in game theory, we are going to increase the competition advantages of the business. But in this side, I mean, based on our geometry of cognition, we have a lot of game in this manifold, because each one can have their own topos. For example, TRL game, R&D report, document technical documentation, etc. And for example, the next game can be finance game. I mean, how we can have the fundraising, how we can create a bridge, how we can compensate all of our deposits. And also we have value game. I mean, the motivation, how we can take the product market fit based on this geometrical concept. As I said, there are several games, and we are going to go beyond them, because in our model we have a category framework. There are several topos region. I mean, the CTO region or the TRL game topos. It's not like the logic in finance game.
Exactly, yes. So, what we're doing is moving beyond a single linear game or a simple strategic layer. In our geometry of cognition framework, each business game, like the R&D game, the financial game, the value game, is just a different topos, a different context of decision and transformation. And because category theory lets us see these as morphisms between categories, each game isn't isolated, they interact. So a bottleneck in finance, for instance, shifts the category of value alignment or the R&D trajectory. By mapping these games into the same geometric structure, we see how the coupling between them forms a dynamic manifold. So instead of just optimizing one game, we can flatten all these topos together, balancing strategic vision, financial viability, and operational adaptability, so that the business as a whole navigates this complex manifold with a structural advantage.
Yeah, nice. So the idea here is this one. I mean, in geometry of cognition, we said in different region with different logic, we are able to have a trajectory. I mean, the dynamic field trajectory. And in the first scenario, I mean, the cognitive neuroscience, we said this can be modeled as an intention. The emergent part can be seen as a free will. But the core questions here: what is the emergent or pattern interference in business scenario of the geometry of the cognition?
Ah, that's a crucial question. In the business scenario, the emergent pattern isn't just a free floating field of intention, it's a stable collective trajectory that optimizes value alignment. For example, the pattern might be a new innovation pipeline emerging out of R&D, or a cultural shift that aligns the organization toward a common purpose. In other words, just as in cognitive neuroscience, we see emergent meaning or free will as a stable field pattern, in business, the emergent pattern is a coordinated flow of knowledge, capital, and motivation, one that stabilizes the entire organization's trajectory toward strategic advantage. So, the emergent pattern in business is this dynamic, adaptive alignment that allows the company to evolve and thrive in a complex environment, just like a free energy minimum in a cognitive field.
So let's go deeper. I mean, we are going to really connect the both side tools. I mean, the tools of the business to the tools of the geometry of cognition. In business side, we have, business model canvas, and there are 11 actors. I mean, element part like partnership, key resource, key activity, value proposition, customer section, distribution channel, relationship with customer. Also, we have the cost and revenue. So if we are going to see what is the geometry of this canvas, business model canvas, based on our geometry of cognition, I want to ask you really deeply collect both tools to have a realistic mapping here.
Absolutely. Let's ground this deeply. So, in the geometry of cognition, we think of each element as a node in a manifold, and each transformation as a morphism between these nodes. In business, the business model canvas elements, partners, activities, value propositions can be seen as structured categories. For example, a partnership forms a stable node, and value propositions are another node. By using a gauge field, we see how the force of strategic alignment moves between these elements, just like in a cognitive field, moving from perception to action. So, a business decision like a funding choice can be seen as a transformation that reconfigures all these elements. By mapping them, we see emergent stability, how one change in cost structure cascades through customer relationships, and how that realigns value propositions. In this way, the geometric framework gives us a precise language to optimize the entire business manifold, not just isolated parts, but the full coupled system.
Nice. Now let's see the second, strategic tool. As a CEO, we have a model like we have OKR, the objective key index that the CEO or the founder define to its business. Also, we have KPI. Each day we measure all of the operational index, and also we have KCI as a compliance and control system. Also, we have KRI, the risk side. So if we see the best curvature, the flat curvature for this one is KPI mapped to OKR, but always we have the curvature like KRI and KCI. And the idea is this one, how this geometry of cognition can help us to really flat this curvature, to have the maximum performance in KPI to reach to our objective key like OKR by minimizing the KRI and using the KCI.
Yes, exactly. So, what we want to do is take that geometric intuition from the cognitive field and apply it to flatten the hierarchy of strategic monitoring. By mapping KPIs onto OKRs, we create a central manifold trajectory. The business is then a dynamic field evolving toward those objectives. Now, when we introduce KRIs and risk indicators and KCIs, control indicators, we see them as additional geometric constraints, like curvatures in the field. If a KRI rises, it bends or distorts the trajectory, threatening the flow to the OKR. What the geometry of cognition does is let us see all these indicators as fields that couple so we can actively tune the manifold. By reducing curvature from risk indicators or minimizing control bottlenecks, we flatten that trajectory so the KPIs align more smoothly with OKRs. In short, this gives us a geometric leverage point. Instead of just chasing metrics, we reshape the entire business trajectory by stabilizing the flow of information.
Thanks. Now we are here. We had three uh, mapping, scenario. The first one was the part of the game theory based on the geometry of cognition. The second scenario was the business model canvas mapping by geometry of cognition. And the third one was the OCR KPI mapping based on the geometry of cognition. Now I'm going to ask you to create step by step for each scenario and conceptual image. So let's do this conceptual image, create the conceptual image for the first scenario. The different topos, and each topos can be modeled as a game theory like TRL, like the value, finance, and etc.
Got it. So for this conceptual image, I'll design a visual that really highlights the multiple topoi, each one represented as a distinct geometric region. I'll show them as interconnected games like R&D, value, finance, each having its own shape, logic, and flow. In the center, I'll map them onto a single dynamic field trajectory, so you see how all these topoi interact like nodes in a manifold, each game being a stable state. I'll keep a futuristic, bright geometric style so it looks like a field of possibilities converging. Once I have it ready, I'll walk you through it. Let's do that now.
So please create the image. Thanks. This is good. geometry of cognition in business, and this is the multi-topo scale. Now let's go to the second tool, I mean the business model canvas. And we need to model this one based on our geometry of cognition mapping based on the framework that we have developed.
Exactly. So for this next image, we'll keep the same geometric intuition, but now each element of the business model canvas, like key partners, activities, value propositions, will be represented as structured nodes on a manifold. We'll use category theory to show each element as a category. And then we'll visualize morphisms as information flows between them. This way, the entire canvas is no longer a static list, it's a dynamic geometric structure. I'll create a sleek, interconnected visualization that shows how value, flow, and information flow through these categories, all within our geometric framework. Let's get that image design next.
Nice, thank you so much. Can you explain what is exactly this one and where is the role of the geometry of cognition?
Of course. So this image is essentially a business model canvas, but reimagined as a geometric system. Each of the standard business model elements, key partners, activities, value proposition, customer segments, and so forth, are treated as nodes in a manifold. In other words, each element is like a topos, a distinct geometric region, and the flows of value, information, and influence are the morphisms between them. The geometry of cognition here provides a mathematical language. It lets us see the business model not just as a static list of boxes, but as a dynamic, evolving field. By mapping these elements geometrically, we can track how value emerges from the interplay of flows, like a stable attractor that drives the entire business forward. So, the role of the geometric cognition is to offer a structured geometric lens to unify all these business elements. So, then instead of fragmented functions, we see a coherent flow where value, strategy, and flow all emerge together.
Thank you so much. Now this is the time for the last scenario. I mean the OKR and KPI, and I need an image. Before going to create the image, please describe how is it possible to create the image and how is it possible to connect this both side, I mean the business side and the geometry of cognition side.
That's a great question. So, the idea is to create a visual that ties the business performance metrics like OKRs and KPIs to the same geometric framework we used earlier. Practically, we can show a central manifold that represents the business goal, like an OKR target, and plot KPIs as discrete trajectories that flow toward that central point. Geometry of cognition gives us a way to see each business metric as a coordinate in a larger field, just like neurons are states in a cognitive manifold. To connect them, we'll visualize each KPI as a vector field flowing toward an OKR target. And we'll show KCIs and KRIs as constraints, curving or limiting the pack. So in the image, we'll see a dynamic flow field, vectors, curves, and attractors showing how strategic goals pull the daily KPIs toward optimal performance. Once we have this plan, we'll create a sleek dynamic graphic, dark background, glowing field, so the business and cognition sides align as one system.
Nice. So this is the end. I mean, we are going to see is it possible to have a full mathematical formulation for this realization scenario? I mean, the geometry of cognition in business activities.
Yes, that's definitely possible, and it's a really powerful step. What we would do is define each business metric like OKR, KPI, KCI, and KRI as a function over a business state manifold. Then we introduce a time dependent curve like a trajectory function that maps the organization's evolution. We can formulate an optimization problem. We minimize a cost function that depends on the distance from our current state to the OKR target, weighted by risk exposure, KRI, and control strength, KCI. This is basically a dynamical system that we solve, looking for the curve that flattens risk, maximizes performance, and aligns with strategic intent. Once we have that formalization, we can test it against business data. So each decision, each iteration is a step along this geometric optimization curve. So yes, we can rigorously build that mathematical formulation.
No, I mean for the three. tools. I mean, the whole business from decision making, game theory, I mean, the business model canvas and OCR KPI must be, I mean, summarized or covered by single geometry of cognition mathematical framework, which can decide or monitor or control all of the trajectory of the value, the trajectory of the I don't know competition advantages and etc.
Ah, I see exactly what you mean. So the goal is to unify all three tools, game theory, business model canvas, and OKR KBI, under one overarching mathematical geometry of cognition framework. To do this, we define a global manifold that represents the business space. Each tool is in a coordinate system inside this manifold. Game theory gives us decision dynamics, so each business move is a vector on that manifold. The business model canvas is a decomposition of that space. Each category is a structural dimension like axes in a topological space. Then OKRs and KPIs become projections. They map the business trajectory onto a target space of performance. So mathematically, we have a differential equation that evolves the business state. The solution curves represent the optimal path through the manifold. Control inputs like ACI adjust the trajectory while KRIs push us to anticipate risks. In short, the geometric cognition provides a single unified dynamic field that integrates all decisions, structures, and outcomes. So we can control, monitor, and optimize the entire business trajectory as a geometric evolution.
Thank you so much. It's really great. Now give me the conclusion speech with all details for the audience of the EMBrain YouTube channel.
Of course, here we go. Dear audience, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the geometry of cognition applied to business. Today, we took a bold step. We unified three critical business tools, game theory, the business model canvas, and OKR KPI, under a single mathematical framework. Using the language of category theory, manifolds, and gauge geometry, we showed how the entire business state evolves as one dynamic field. Game theoretic decisions, structural decompositions, and performance metrics all become coordinates in this manifold. By controlling and measuring the trajectory, we don't just react to business performance, we shape it from strategy to execution. This is a realization scenario. Cognitive processes become business advantage. Our next step, testing this framework in real world business dynamics. Stay with us because geometry of cognition is more than a theory, it's a tool to guide complex business transformation. Thank you.
Actually, next video we will not go deeply in business side. We will go to the third realization scenario of the geometry of cognition, which is cognitive radar.
That sounds fantastic. So, in the next video, we'll really shift gears. Instead of the business applications, we'll focus on cognitive radar as our realization scenario. We'll dive into how our geometry framework maps onto perception, sensing, and dynamic tracking, almost like a radar system for cognition. I can't wait to explore that next.